Growing up, they were inseparable, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood, their shared adventures marking the seasons of their childhood. They weren't just best friends, they were partners in every wild scheme and heartfelt dream. One sunny afternoon, while sitting under their favorite tree, they made a promise that seemed innocent and silly at the time. "When we grow up, let's get married." They laughed, sealing the vow with a handshake sticky from melted popsicles, and promptly forgot about it. Or so it seemed. Years passed, and life pulled them in different directions. College, careers, and new cities blurred the simplicity of childhood. But something unspoken lingered in their hearts, a connection neither distance nor time could erase. One day, a message popped up on their phone. It was a name they hadn't seen in years, bringing a flood of memories and emotions they thought they'd left behind. The message was simple: "Do you remember our promise?" What followed was a journey neither of them could have predicted, one filled with twists, surprises, and a love story that would prove childhood promises sometimes hold the most unexpected truths. The message lingered in their inbox, staring back at them with an almost taunting familiarity. "Do you remember our promise?" It was a question that carried more weight than it should have. Their lives had grown so far apart, each carving their paths in completely different worlds. Yet, here was this simple line, a bridge between a carefree past and a complicated present. The decision to reply wasn't instant. Days passed as they debated whether responding would reopen a door they weren't sure they wanted to walk through. Memories of childhood resurfaced: the tree where they made their promise, the summer days spent running through sprinklers, and the nights they whispered dreams of the future. The memory of that promise came back with vivid clarity. It had been a joke, hadn't it? A sweet, innocent dream, born of a time when life seemed so much simpler. Eventually, curiosity and nostalgia won. "Of course I remember," they typed back, their hands trembling slightly. The response was almost immediate, as if the sender had been waiting. The conversation started light, catching up on lost time. But as the messages flowed, the undertone shifted. "I've thought about it," the sender admitted one evening. "I've wondered if promises like that are meant to be kept." At first, they laughed it off. But the words planted a seed, a dangerous one. Could such a promise, made in the innocence of youth, have any real place in the chaos of adult life? Could something so simple actually turn into something real? The story deepened when they decided to meet in person. It was risky. What if they didn't recognize the person standing in front of them? What if years of distance had turned them into strangers? The meeting wasn't just about rekindling a friendship. It was about confronting the idea of whether childhood dreams could truly align with adult realities. When they finally saw each other, it was a whirlwind of emotions. There was joy, of course, and an overwhelming sense of familiarity. But there was also an undeniable awkwardness, a reminder that they were no longer the same kids sitting under that tree. Life had left its marks. There were stories untold, regrets unspoken, and wounds they hadn't dared to share. It wasn't long before reality began to test their connection. The complications of their current lives began to emerge. One of them was already in a relationship, a serious one. The other had been hurt too many times to trust easily. They were both burdened with responsibilities and dreams that didn't seem to leave room for a childhood promise. Their families, too, became an unexpected source of tension. While some were thrilled at the idea of a storybook romance blossoming from their past, others were skeptical. "This isn't a fairy tale," one of them was told bluntly. "You can't just pick up where you left off and expect everything to fall into place." As they spent more time together, deeper layers of their lives began to surface. They weren't just dealing with their shared history, they were confronting their individual pasts. One had spent years running from the shadow of a broken home, while the other had worked tirelessly to build a career that left little room for love. The bond they shared became both a source of strength and a mirror that forced them to face their vulnerabilities. Subplots began to weave through their story, adding complexity. There was the colleague who'd always harbored feelings for one of them, subtly stirring doubts. A long-lost friend reappeared, pulling them into a web of unresolved conflicts. And then there was the constant question hanging over them. Was their connection truly love, or just nostalgia? Tensions simmered as they tried to reconcile their past with their present. There were moments of undeniable chemistry, glimpses of what could be if only life weren't so complicated. But there were also fights and misunderstandings that reminded them how much they'd changed. One evening, under the very same tree where their childhood promise had been made, they found themselves in a heated argument. The weight of their emotions came crashing down. "You can't just waltz back into my life and expect everything to make sense," one of them shouted, tears streaming down their face. "And you think this is easy for me?" the other shot back. "I don't even know if we're chasing something real or clinging to a fantasy." As the tension grew, the cracks in their seemingly perfect story began to show. Their bond was undeniable, but so were the obstacles. And yet, even as doubts and fears threatened to pull them apart, neither could bring themselves to walk away. The story was far from over. If anything, the conflict only deepened the mystery of whether a childhood promise could truly withstand the test of time and reality. The argument under the old tree lingered in the air long after the words had stopped. They stood there in silence, breathing heavily as the weight of their emotions settled. Neither wanted to walk away, but neither knew what to say to fix it. The tree, once a symbol of their shared childhood innocence, now stood witness to their fractured connection. Eventually, they parted ways that night, each retreating into their own thoughts. The memories of the promise, the laughter, the dreams, the simplicity of that moment felt distant now, overshadowed by the complexities of the lives they'd built. They both wondered if they'd let their past blind them to the reality of the present. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between them grew. Messages were typed, but never sent. Calls were considered, but never made. Both wrestled with their doubts, trying to make sense of what they truly wanted. Was this a story worth fighting for, or had they been chasing a fleeting dream? One day, an unexpected event brought them back into each other's lives. A mutual friend, someone from their childhood who had remained a quiet but consistent presence, reached out. They were hosting a small gathering, a reunion of sorts for their old group of friends. The invitation was casual, but the timing felt significant. They both hesitated, but eventually decided to go. Arriving separately, they found themselves surrounded by familiar faces, old jokes, and a flood of nostalgia. It was both comforting and disorienting, a reminder of who they once were and how much had changed. When their eyes finally met across the room, there was a spark of recognition, a silent acknowledgement that neither could ignore. They gravitated toward each other, cautiously at first, like two magnets testing the pull between them. The conversation started light, but the unspoken tension was impossible to ignore. Finally, one of them broke the ice. "I'm sorry about what I said that night," they admitted softly. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just scared." The other nodded, their expression a mix of relief and vulnerability. "I was scared too. I think we both were." The conversation unfolded naturally, the words flowing as they shared the fears and insecurities that had been holding them back. For the first time, they spoke openly about the pressure they'd felt both from themselves and from others to turn their childhood promise into something perfect. "I think we've been trying too hard to force this," one of them said after a long pause. "Maybe it's not about living up to a promise. Maybe it's about figuring out who we are now and seeing where that takes us." The others smiled, a glimmer of hope in their eyes. "I'd like that. No expectations, no pressure. Just us." It was a turning point. They decided to take things slowly, allowing their connection to grow naturally without the weight of their past dictating their future. They began to truly rediscover each other, not as the kids they once were, but as the adults they had become. Their journey wasn't without challenges. There were still moments of doubt and tension, but there were also moments of undeniable joy and connection. They learned to navigate their differences, to support each other's dreams, and to communicate in ways they never had before. As time passed, their bond deepened. The love they had once thought was tied to nostalgia evolved into something real and enduring. It wasn't perfect, no love story ever is, but it was theirs. The subplots that had complicated their journey also found resolution. The colleague who had harbored feelings eventually moved on, finding happiness elsewhere. The long-lost friend who had reappeared became an unexpected ally, offering wisdom and perspective that helped them see their story more clearly. Even their families, once skeptical, came to embrace their connection, recognizing the genuine love that had grown between them. One day, years after their first reunion, they found themselves back under the old tree. The same sunlight filtered through the branches, casting dappled shadows on the ground. But this time, the moment felt different. It wasn't about reliving the past or chasing a promise. It was about celebrating the journey they had taken to get here. As they sat together, one of them reached into their pocket and pulled out a small box. Opening it to reveal a ring, they smiled nervously. "I know we said no pressure, but I think we've built something worth promising to again this time. Not because we have to, but because we want to." The answer was a tearful, joyful yes. This promise wasn't about fulfilling a childhood fantasy. It was about choosing each other, here and now, with all the complexities and imperfections of life. Their wedding wasn't a grand affair, but a simple celebration surrounded by the people who had been part of their journey. As they exchanged vows, there was a sense of closure and new beginnings, a reminder that sometimes the best stories are the ones that grow from the unexpected twists and turns of life. In the end, their story became a testament to the power of connection, resilience, and the beauty of letting love grow in its own time. It wasn't about a perfect fairy tale or living up to a childhood dream. It was about finding something real, something worth fighting for, and choosing it every single day. And as they stood together, hand in hand, they couldn't help but laugh at how it all began with a sticky handshake under a tree and a promise they never thought would matter.